not merely for the money, but from the isolation, from the threat of family links. He's got some impressive things to say.
20 to 25 years drowning out some poor childhood experiences with drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. Gotten rid of the drugs, got rid of the alcohol. Next thing I got to get rid of is the cigarettes. And I had no idea that the nicotine played such an important part in keeping that door closed.
In keeping the door closed to?
The memories that I've blocked out with all these years with the alcohol and the drugs.
So you see what's happening to you now as related to what happened to you decades ago?
Yep. I found a way to block the emotions and the memories.
With?
Drugs, alcohol, cigarettes.
That's an extraordinary statement. I mean, that this guy is cognitively aware of the functional aspects of what we confuse ourselves by describing as dysfunctional behavior. Let's think a bit more about that. He's talking about alcohol. That's easy. That's a no-brainer. Sit down, have something to drink, relax. It's built into the language. The understanding of that is hidden out in the open. He's talking about smoking. He's a 2-3 pack a day smoker. Before the current public health onslaught against smoking has stopped our thinking about it, there was, from 1920 to about 1960, in the international medical literature, there were innumerable articles about the psychoactive benefits of nicotine in terms of its anti-anxiety effects, in terms of its antidepressant activity, in terms of its anger suppressant activity, and in terms of its appetite suppressant activity. I mean, who doesn't know somebody who quit smoking only to gain weight? We're not used to describing that, however, in the kind of terms that I'm using now. In addition, nicotine actually hypes intellectual performance. People do better on standardized testing after nicotine than they do without it. That's kind of interesting. So am I saying that smoking is good for you? Yes. But isn't it bad for you? Yes. Not at the same instant, of course. I mean, the benefit is in 30 seconds. The risk is in 30 years. He's talking about what are conventionally called addictions. And addiction, if one thinks carefully about it, is the unconscious, compulsive use of psychoactive materials or agents. Describing it a different way, in the weight program, when people achieve a certain level of success, we give them a coffee cup. And on the side of that cup, it has printed this sentence: it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. As in, maybe the next mouthful will do it. Whatever I buy on the street will do it. Or maybe the next woman or man will do it. The unconscious compulsive use of psychoactive materials or agents, it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. The conventional view is that addiction is due to the characteristics that are intrinsic in the molecular structure of some substance. Sounds pretty scientific. I used to believe that. What we found was exactly the opposite. That addiction has an enormous correlation with characteristics that are intrinsic to that individual's childhood experiences. If this is true, the implications for most treatment programs are profound. So let's look at the evidence. Start on the gentle end of things with smoking. I don't know what things are like in Canada, but in San Diego there is intense legitimatized public health abuse of smokers. I mean, you can't smoke in most buildings, you can't smoke on planes, trains, can't smoke in bars. Town up from San Diego has made it illegal to smoke on public beaches. You get the idea. I mean, if you work in a building, typically there's an orange square painted outside, often next to the garbage cans where you're supposed to smoke, etc. So when we match ACE score versus pack a day or more smoking as an adult in an environment that is notably hostile to smokers, what you see is that as the ACE score goes up, the probability of being a smoker goes up quite significantly. So there is a 250% stepwise proportionate increase. This doesn't fit in with the idea that, people smoke because they pass too many Marlboro billboards on the way to school. And maybe it has something to do with why, in spite of increasing public health pressure against smoking, there has been no net decrease in smoking in the U.S. for the past dozen years. Looking at some related aspects, regular smoking before the age of 14, regular smoking before the age of 14. As the ACE score goes up, the likelihood of being a regular smoker before the age of 14 goes up approximately 300% in this stepwise graded relationship. The relationship to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, as the ACE score goes up, the likelihood of COPD goes up approximately 300%. And you might say, yeah, but that's just because they're smokers. Well, not completely, because there are a number of people with COPD who don't smoke. And how does one explain that? Here's an insight, and to broaden the picture a bit, we'll look at coronary heart disease, coronary artery disease, heart attack, angina pectoris, etc. Pretty much everybody knows from the Framingham study that there are certain well-recognized risk factors for coronary artery disease, diabetes, smoking, cholesterol, etc. Most people forget that there's a significant proportion of people with coronary disease who don't have those recognized risk factors. When one looks at that group and applies the ACE score to them, the group gets absorbed. And if you look at it more carefully, what you see is that where the conventional risk factors are not present, or where they have been corrected for statistically, that emotional abuse will produce a 1.7-fold increase in the likelihood of coronary disease later in life. Physical abuse, a 1.5-fold increase, sexual abuse, 1.4 increase, etc., etc. Growing up in a home where someone was imprisoned during their childhood, 1.7-fold. And as I hope I made clear before, these are hardly likely to exist as standalone items. I mean, you don't grow up in a house where, mother was an alcoholic, but everything else was fine. You don't grow up in a house where your brother was in prison, but it was a terrific family otherwise. The real issue here is now recognized as due to the fact that prolonged chronic stress, high levels of circulating cortisol over the course of a lifetime, have a strong association oftentimes with marked increases in inflammatory response. That the engine underlying coronary artery disease is inflammatory response in the coronary arteries, that the engine underlying many pulmonary conditions, primary pulmonary fibrosis being one recently recognized, where chronic stress appears to be a major factor in its causality. So what I'm getting at is you have two major causes of some of the most common diseases we have. One is the long-term effect of coping devices, smoking, alcohol, drug use, etc. The other is totally unrelated to those coping devices as intermediary mechanisms and is related purely to the long-term effect of chronic stress. A big issue being more and more recognized in the past few years. We look at self-acknowledged adult alcoholism. The question we used was simple: have you ever considered yourself to be an alcoholic? And understanding full well that many people choose not to recognize themselves as being alcoholic, we're probably understating the relationship, but given that, what you see here is that as the ACE score goes up, the likelihood of being a self-acknowledged alcoholic goes up in a stepwise proportionate manner, about 550%.